Even before the release of Dr. No, both Eon Productions and United Artists knew they had a winner. United Artists approved the sequel before the release of Dr. No and even doubled the budget to $2 million. This is still a very small budget as Hollywood movies go, but an acknowledgement of the success of the first movie. In fact, From Russia with Love would be released in England while Dr. No was still at the end of its theater run. Terence Young, who did a phenomenal job directing the last movie, Dr. No, was hired again for From Russia with Love, and they chose From Russia with Love when a few years back, President John F. Kennedy publicly announced in an interview with Life magazine that he was a huge James Bond fan and that From Russia with Love was one of his top 10 favorite books. This is what drew attention to the character in the US and inspired Cubby Broccoli to buy the rights and helped get United Artists to approve the first movie. After production of this film, Eon actually gave President Kennedy a special private screening in the White House, and he loved the film. Now, unfortunately, 3 days later, JFK was tragically assassinated in Dallas, but From Russia with Love was the last movie he got to see. What inspired Ian Fleming to write the book From Russia with Love in 1956 was news headlines. In 1950, a U.S. naval attaché, Eugene Simon Karp, was assassinated and thrown from the Orient Express train by a communist agent, and Ian Fleming was fascinated by this and decided to write a movie around this event. The producers chose to shoot in Istanbul because Ian Fleming himself had been involved in an Interpol conference in Istanbul, and the higher budget allowed them to shoot on location at exotic locales. Screenwriters Joanna Harwood and Richard Maybaum, who wrote Dr. No, returned to write the screenplay for From Russia with Love. While From Russia with Love is the 5th book, one book before Dr. No, the 6th book, they decided to make this movie a direct sequel to Dr. No. They switched the chronology of the stories. In the book, the antagonists are the Soviet undercover agency, Smersh. However, they changed it to Spectre since Spectre had already been introduced in Dr. No. In the books, they wouldn't be introduced until the 9th book on Her Majesty's Secret Service. They had Spectre getting revenge against James Bond for killing their top agent, Dr. No, making this movie a direct sequel. Sean Connery was given a $100,000 bonus on top of his $58,000 salary to return as James Bond. Now, Sean Connery was born in Edinburgh, Scotland, and his first job was as a milkman. And at age 16, he joined the Royal Navy, where he got 2 tattoos to reflect his lifelong commitments. One tattoo says Mom and Dad, and the other says Scotland Forever. He was assigned to the HMS Formidable, but was discharged after 3 years of service due to having ulcers. After leaving the Navy, he got a job as a lorry driver, that's truck driver for us Americans, a lifeguard, and a nude model for the Edinburgh College of Art, and even got a job as a coffin polisher. Connery tried competitive bodybuilding, but could not compete against the sheer muscle size of the American bodybuilders, whom he felt had to be living unhealthy lives to reach that level of muscle mass, and didn't want to do that. He tried professional football, that's soccer to us Americans, and was offered a spot on the Manchester United team for a salary of £25 a week. He could not see himself playing soccer for the rest of his life and declined the offer in order to try his hand at acting. Connery landed a few minor roles and began acting for the Oxford Theatre, which led to a few small TV roles. And in 1957, he had a minor role in Action of the Tiger, which was directed by Terence Young, and eventually nabbed a major role in the 1958 Another Time, Another Place. And in 1959, he landed a leading role in the Disney movie Darby O'Gill and the Little People, and the rest is history. Back to From Russia with Love. Already the plot here is more complex and more coherent. The pacing is improved and the villain is more threatening. The action's more grand and the espionage is more complex. And Sean Connery just seems more comfortable in the role. At the beginning of the movie, James Bond is in M's office and M is trying to talk about how this defector has personally requested that James Bond accompany her. And of course Bond, nor M, buys it.
No, it's some sort of trap.
He doesn't like it. And then M shows him a photograph of the agent, and James Bond looks at the picture, and it's a beautiful face. And you see James Bond's face sort of loosen up, kind of melt, and then he says,
"Really, I'm not too busy at the moment, sir."
And Sean Connery just plays that scene brilliantly, and it tells you all you need to know about James Bond. The fact that he's willing to go into a Spectre trap, risk his life, get involved in a web of international conspiracy and espionage, just so he can meet a beautiful woman. And here's an interesting bit of trivia for the hardcore James Bond fan. In a novel, James Bond does not drive an Aston Martin. He certainly doesn't drive a Lotus. He drives a Bentley. In the books, James Bond loves his beloved vintage 1930 blower Bentley. And this is the only movie where he drives a Bentley accurate to the novels. And it's a Bentley 3.5-liter drophead coupe. And in the next film, Goldfinger, he'll drive the iconic Aston Martin, which will symbolize James Bond on film. So we are introduced to 3 new characters, and Robert Shaw is fantastic as the main heavy villain, Donald Red Grant. He looks tall, he's buff, he's physically imposing, and he's barely recognizable from his better-known role to our generation as Quint in Steven Spielberg's Jaws. Lotte Lenya is intriguing as the diminutive but formidable Rosa Klebb, the lady with a knife shooting out of her shoe. And we also get Spectre leader number 1, aka Ernst Stravo Blofeld, played by Anthony Dawson, who played the Spectre agent Professor Dent in the last movie, and here his voice is dubbed by Viennese actor Eric Pullman. It is now 3 formidable villains against our sole protagonist, and we'll talk more about these 3 characters in a minute. And from the beginning of the film, we feel that Bond might really be in danger, and we are off for a roller coaster ride. However, the production did not go as easy as it did in the last film. There's going to be production delays, they're going to go over budget, there's going to be helicopter crashes, explosions, car accidents, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. The production of this movie was a complete mess, which makes it extra incredible that the movie turned out so well. This film actually introduces 2 new elements to the traditions that were established in Dr. No, and this is going to help solidify what we now call the James Bond formula. So already we get the pattern of the gun barrel sequence that was introduced in the last movie, Dr. No, and it is still stuntman Bob Simmons in the sequence. But from here, we have 2 new elements that will become permanent James Bond fixtures. The opening action sequence, and then the musical montage. And these fixtures will be in every Bond movie going forward. We also get Desmond Llewellyn as Q himself. Peter Burton, who played the quartermaster Major Boothroyd in the last film, was not available for this movie, so they recast him with a new actor. And Desmond Llewellyn will go on to become a James Bond staple. He'll be in 17 James Bond movies, more than any other actor. Desmond Llewellyn was born in Newport, Wales, and wanted to become a minister. However, at Radley College, he became interested in theater production and went on to become a professional stagehand. However, he was encouraged to take some acting roles. Now, during this time, he also became an avid rugby player and even played rugby for Newport RFC and remained a fan of the game his entire life. At 20 years of age, he joined the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts and was hired for a few small stage roles, and married fellow acting company actress Pamela Mary Pantlin in 1938, and would stay married to her for the next 60 years until his passing in 1999. And that's really nice. The year after he married, World War II broke out and he commissioned as a second lieutenant in the Royal Welsh Fusiliers, an infantry branch of the British Army. He was actually captured by the Germans in 1941 and spent the rest of the war in a prisoner of war camp, and even attempted an escape by tunneling out, but was captured and then liberated by Allied forces in 1945. After the war, he found small roles in movies, including the 1948 film Hamlet starring Laurence Olivier, as well as small roles in The Adventures of Robin Hood and The Invisible Man, and by the 1950s, he became a pretty prominent character actor. In 1963, Terence Young asked Desmond Llewellyn to read for the part of Major Boothroyd. Therefore, we know that this is supposed to be the same quartermaster Major Boothroyd who was played by Peter Burton in the last movie. So it is the same character, but recast. However, to avoid confusion, they refer to him here as simply the equipments officer, which made some fans think that he was a separate character. Now, the letter Q for Q Branch was first mentioned in Ian Fleming's first book, Casino Royale, and its head, Major Boothroyd, first made his appearance in Fleming's 6th book, Dr. No. Terence Young knew Desmond Llewellyn from a film he directed called They Were Not Divided, where he had a thick Welsh accent.
I coshed when them Island Division, chaps. Costume good and proper. Oh, you mark my words, wacky boy.
His own natural native Welsh accent, and wanted him for the role of Q because they envisioned Q as having a Welsh accent. However, Desmond Llewellyn strongly believed that Q should have an upper-class aristocratic English accent.
Is that Rosa?
And was able to persuade Terence Young and Ian Fleming, and was hired for the role. He would be in every James Bond movie from here on out except Live and Let Die, and he continued to play Q until The World Is Not Enough. While it appears he's saying goodbye to the character after introducing John Cleese as R and saying that
Always have an escape plan.
but this was just a coincidence. He and Eon had planned for him to be in the next James Bond movie, but unfortunately, 3 weeks after the premiere of the release of World Is Not Enough, he was driving home after signing autographs and was involved in a car accident and died at the age of 85. And with Q, we get the introduction of the clever spy gadget referred to as Q gadgets in the novels. And this time, it's a briefcase. It has a folding sniper rifle with 20 rounds of ammunition, it has hidden throwing knives, it has 50 gold sovereigns, and it has a trick latch where if you open it improperly, a tear gas bomb detonates in the victim's face. It's a simple but pretty cool Q gadget. And of course, the Q gadgets will get much better in the next movie, Goldfinger. We also get the trope of the uber-strong henchman, a super strong man, nearly invincible, who is also colorful and larger than life, and fiercely loyal to the main villain. And we feel that James Bond really might be in trouble. The strong henchman here is Donald Red Grant, played by Robert Shaw. He was born in Lancashire, northeast England, when he was 7, and their father moved to Scotland, and after his death, moved back to Cornwall when he was 12. Robert Shaw attended the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts in London and then served as an air crewman in the Royal Air Force in World War II. He was a very successful stage performer and quickly landed parts on television and a few minor roles in movies. And in 1956, he became a big TV star when he landed the role of Captain Dan Tempest in The Buccaneers, which ran for 39 episodes, and then became a prominent character actor in movies. And in 1960, he wrote his first novel, The Hiding Place, and in 1961, his second novel, The Sun Doctor, was awarded the Hawthornden Den Prize in 1962. He also wrote a play called The Man in the Glass Booth that was a huge success in London and hit Broadway in 1967. In 1962, he nabbed the role of Donald Red Grant in this movie and had a very successful career as a character actor in many movies from here on out. His biggest role is being Quint in Steven Spielberg's 1975 mega hit Jaws. And he is fantastic here as Donald Grant. He's fierce, he's strong, very cunning, and we feel he is the Spectre version of James Bond, a worthy nemesis to our hero. They both have short, tight haircuts, but he has blonde hair to Bond's black hair. They're both tough and masculine. While Bond exudes warmth, Grant is cold and calculating. He is Bond's opposite number. We get so many elements that are associated with the entire James Bond franchise that have become fodder for any James Bond satire or parody. We get Blofeld stroking his long-haired white cat. We get the concept of the femme fatale who switches allegiances due to what has become known as, well, let's say, James Bond's masculine charms. We get exotic locales, and we get over-the-top action. Another thing I really appreciated about this film was the portrayal of certain real-world complexity in the espionage game. When Bond lands in Istanbul, he notices he's being followed, and the chauffeur casually tells him,
"They follow us, we follow them. It's a sort of understanding we have."
And I love this. One of my favorite scenes in the film, the scene which many cite as one of the best fight scenes in all of cinema, is on the Orient Express when our villain, Agent Red Grant, meets up with Bond and pretends to be his MI6 contact. Now we the audience, we know this is a Spectre agent, but Bond doesn't, and it creates this tense, slow burn, and we the audience are just squirming in our seats. And I thought this was such a brilliant scene. This is pure Alfred Hitchcock in action. And then the scene turns into one of the best, one of the most realistic fight sequences ever put on film. And it's interesting how this action scene, filmed over 60 years ago, is still a better fight scene than many of the fight scenes filmed today. And I think at that time, from the beginning of cinema to the late 1980s, fight scenes were clearly done by actors who couldn't fight. And their punches don't look very impactful, they don't have good technique when they're punching, obviously no fight training, and it sort of looks pathetic on screen. And it looks unrealistic and unconvincing. Well, in 2000, post-Matrix, when Hollywood films began to be influenced by Hong Kong cinema, it sort of shifted far in the other direction. And now, in modern films, when you see a fight scene, everyone is a professional martial artist with too perfect a technique that looks too choreographed. And now every scene feels like a Hong Kong kung fu film, and that comes across as equally unrealistic and unconvincing, but in the other direction. But the fight scene here in this movie, it looks real. It really does look like two trained fighters really fighting to the end. And that really adds tension and impact to the film because it doesn't look choreographed. It looks very dramatic and looks very real. And I think only a few films have really topped the realism or even matched the realism of this fight scene. Because director Terence was a college boxer and knew how to fight and had a vision for the scene. And Sean Connery and Robert Shaw actually did the fight scenes themselves. And this short sequence took 3 weeks to put on film. But I think the final product is well worth it. So I'm interested in hearing your opinions. What did you think of this fight scene? Can you think of another Hollywood action scene that is as good or better than the scene presented here? Let me know in the comments below. Agent number 3, Rosa Klebb, was played by Austrian singer Lotte Lenya, who was 65 years old when she starred in From Russia with Love. In her 20s, she was a prominent singer in Austria. However, with the rise of Nazism in Germany, she would leave Germany. And she was not Jewish, but her husband, composer Kurt Weill, was Jewish. And they would leave Germany. She moved to Paris. They got divorced. She starred in a musical sung ballet, The Seven Deadly Sins, written by Kurt Weill, which became an international hit. Lotte Lenya and Kurt Weill reunited again in New York in 1937 and remarried each other and stayed married until his death in 1950. In 1956, she won a Tony Award for her role in The Threepenny Opera. However, she was in her late 50s and her voice was deepening, so she began to transition into acting. This is cool, but in 1955, Louis Armstrong recorded an English version of a song written by her late husband, Kurt Weill, called Mac the Knife, which is a classic Louis Armstrong song. Kurt Weill wrote this song in German in 1928, and Lotte Lenya was present in the studio when Louis Armstrong recorded Mac the Knife. And as an homage, he improvised and added her name to the lyrics with the line, "Look out for Miss Lotte Lenya." So now you know what that's about when you hear the song. In 1961, she played Contessa Magda Terribili Gonzalez in The Roman Spring of Mrs. Stone and was nominated both for an Academy Award and Golden Globe for Best Supporting Actress. And in 1963, she was cast as Rosa Klebb. Now, another interesting thing about the book is that From Russia with Love comes before Dr. No in the novels. Now, remember in Dr. No when M. hands Bond his Walter PPK and talks about how he had some problems and was injured, almost killed in his last mission? Well, that is a reference to the events of From Russia with Love in the book. And the reason why he's even in Jamaica is that he's at a hospital doing convalescent rest after actually getting stuck with Rosa Klebb's poison knife in the novel. This is because in Ian Fleming's book, the 1957 From Russia with Love, this was Ian Fleming's 5th book, and he was already getting tired of writing the character. So that was going to be the last James Bond book. So at the end, Rosa Klebb manages to kick Bond and impale him with a poison shoe knife, and the novel ends with Bond falling to the floor and presumably dying. After From Russia with Love, Ian Fleming decided to publish his 6th book on James Bond, the novel Dr. No. For the role of femme fatale Tatiana Romanova, the producers auditioned many women, but the role went to Daniela Bianchi, mostly because she was Sean Connery's personal pick. Daniela Bianchi was born in Rome, and her father was an Italian army colonel, and she grew up studying ballet and even worked as a fashion model in her teens. And she began acting in 1958 at the age of 16 and was an extra in a few movies. And at the age of 18, Daniela Bianchi was the 1960s Miss Universo Italia, and in the larger Miss Universe competition in 1960, she was first runner-up. And in 1963, at the age of 21, she landed her first major movie role in this movie. And this would temporarily propel her movie career, which didn't really pan out as she had hoped, but 7 years later, she retired from acting to marry billionaire shipping magnate Alberto Camelli. And they have one son and stayed married for 48 years until his death in 2018. She is alive today and very wealthy. Now, unfortunately, she had a very strong Italian accent and could not resolve that accent despite numerous intense English lessons. So in the end, the producers just decided to dub her voice over with Barbara Jefford. So that is not her voice you're hearing in the movie From Russia with Love.
That are going to be changed.
Mexican actor, international legend Pedro Armendariz plays Kerim Bey. John Ford actually called Cubby Broccoli and asked if he had a role for Pedro Armendariz to be in his movie and to cast him as a personal favor to him, which Cubby Broccoli, of course, obliged. And sadly, he had terminal cancer during production of this film and actually took the role so he could leave money for his family. And director Terence was very accommodating and let Armendariz film the scenes earlier in production, and sure enough, before he could finish all his scenes, he filmed most of them, but had 2 or 3 scenes left, but actually had to go in the hospital where he would pass away. But the producer's director, Terence would pay him a full salary that he was able to leave a considerable sum of money that he made from this movie to his children. But it is a really sad story for this legendary actor because he was apparently in a lot of pain during the end of his life from cancer, and when he was at the UCLA Medical Center, he actually snuck in a gun and fatally shot himself in the chest. And it is a very tragic story. But years later, his son would actually follow in his father's footsteps and become an actor himself, and was actually in a James Bond movie. The actor is Pedro Armendariz Jr., named after his father, and he will play General Hector Lopez, the president of Isthmus, in License to Kill. Sylvia Trench returns as James Bond's kind of girlfriend, and she was going to be a regular character in the franchise, but this was dropped, so this will be her last film. Walter Gotell plays Morenzi, a Spectre agent who trains on Spectre Island, and he will go on to be a recurring James Bond character, General Gogol, head of the KGB, for the Roger Moore era of Bond. Monty Norman was not asked to return, and John Barry was hired or promoted as the primary soundtrack composer and will continue to compose James Bond scores for 11 Bond films. And he also went on to write the soundtrack for Dances with Wolves, The Cotton Club, Out of Africa, Chaplin, and oddly enough, Bruce Lee's film Game of Death. But he will go on to win 5 Academy Awards. Ken Adam, who blew everyone away with his production designs for Dr. No, drew the attention of Stanley Kubrick, who hired him for Dr. Strangelove. In this movie, he was replaced by Sid Cain, but Ken Adam would return to design the sets for Goldfinger, You Only Live Twice, Diamonds Are Forever, The Spy Who Loved Me, and Moonraker. Here's an interesting bit of trivia. Ken Adam also designed the famous car in a movie adaptation of Ian Fleming's other famous novel, Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. Ken Adam will be nominated for 4 Academy Awards, winning 2. We can't talk about this movie without talking about the 1959 Alfred Hitchcock classic North by Northwest, which came out 3 years before this movie was an international box office smash hit. It is obvious that From Russia with Love was strongly influenced by North by Northwest. James Bond's look and dress, his suits, mirror those of Cary Grant, and the story structure of this movie mirrors the story structure of North by Northwest. The train scene where Red Grant has the drop on James Bond is pure suspense from Alfred Hitchcock's playbook, that slow burn Hitchcock is always talking about. And finally, the MacGuffin that everyone in the movie is after, in From Russia with Love, the Lecter, is eerily similar to the MacGuffin of the microfilm of confidential government documents that the villains are trying to smuggle in North by Northwest. And also in this movie, there's a helicopter scene which was noted by fans to be reminiscent of the airplane crash scene in North by Northwest. Well, this is not a coincidence. You see, there is actually no corresponding helicopter chase scene in the book From Russia with Love, and sure enough, the helicopter scene was a direct homage to Alfred Hitchcock's airplane crop duster scene in North by Northwest. The initial plans were to film the helicopter scene in Istanbul. However, this proved to be difficult, and they eventually moved the production to Scotland. Another scene that was added to the end of the movie to buff up the action sequence is not only the helicopter scene, but also the boat scene. Like the helicopter scene, the boat scene is not in the book, but was added after production to buff up the action of the movie. The boat scene was influenced from an action scene called The Red Beret, which was also directed by Terence Young. Like the helicopter scene, the boat scene was also going to be filmed in Istanbul. However, the waters around Istanbul proved very difficult due to the high waves, and the boats kept nearly crashing. After principal photography on location in Istanbul, the entire production was moved to Scotland, and the production was seriously late and over budget. In an attempt to catch up on the time, Terence Young had the crew work late shifts, and they worked so hard that apparently Danielle Bianchi's driver fell asleep at the wheel while driving her to work, and they got in a car accident. Her car rolled over several times and almost went into the water. Sean Connery, who was in the car behind them, came out and helped pull Daniela Bianchi out of her car. Fortunately for production, the complicated helicopter scene actually went off without a hitch. Eventually, much of the helicopter scene was actually filmed with a miniature remote-controlled helicopter. Interestingly, a helicopter crash did occur, but not during the helicopter scene, but actually while scouting locations for the boat scene. Terence Young was in a helicopter scouting locations when the pilot of the helicopter crashed the helicopter into the lake, almost drowning them both. After being rescued from a helicopter that was submerged in the water, Terence Young got out and apparently just started directing again. When it came to filming the spectacular boat scene, this involved an incredible explosion of oil on the water. Well, this is a very complicated setup, and they really had one chance to do this right, and they did it. They did it successfully. It seemed to go well. The explosion was grand. However, after the explosion, it turned out that none of the cameras were rolling. You can't make this up. And they had to reset everything up and film it again the next day. Filming was completed, and they only had 3 months to edit this movie before the premiere. However, they were concerned that this movie was a mess. Much of the sequences didn't make sense. The plot did not seem coherent. It was up to editor Peter Hunt to fix the movie, and he only had 3 months to do so. Well, Peter Hunt went to work, and he did just that. The work Peter Hunt did on this movie was brilliant. He reordered sequences, made the plot more coherent, and basically saved the movie. In reordering the movie, one of the things Peter Hunt did is put one of the action sequences before the musical credits, thus unintentionally creating the pre-credit action sequence. Ultimately, Peter Hunt did a monumental job in the editing process. It is believed that Peter Hunt saved this movie in the edit. So the final cut of this film was completed on time. So how did this film do? And how did it do against North by Northwest, the movie it was basically copying? Alfred Hitchcock's North by Northwest was made on a budget of $4.3 million and made a respectable $9.8 million at the box office. And From Russia with Love actually blew this out of the water. From Russia with Love was an even bigger hit than Dr. No, and it was both a critical hit and a box office success, doubling Dr. No's receipts. Made on a budget of only $2 million, it made $12.5 million in its first release and would go on to make $78 million worldwide, equivalent to $804 million today when adjusted for inflation. And that's 8 times more than the movie it basically copied, North by Northwest, and only had half of that film's budget. So From Russia with Love was an uncontested smash hit. Now, do you know about the controversial audio track? Apparently in 1991, when Criterion released their Laserdisc with all the audio commentary by director Terence Young, well, apparently Terence Young, who was 76 at the time, was retired and maybe just didn't care. Well, he was a little too open and candid and frank about his time directing James Bond and revealed a little too much information about some of the backstage gossip that occurred while filming this movie. For example, he had talked about how he thought Ian Fleming was an alcoholic. Terence Young named people on the set that were smoking marijuana, named them by name. He talked about how actor Armendariz would be in pain from cancer and all of a sudden disappear for a few minutes and then come back appearing all smiling and energetic, obviously having taken opiate painkillers. And on this audio track, he also talked about Lotte Lenya's insatiable womanly appetites and even referred to her as, quote, a freak, unquote. Cubby Broccoli was furious, and who knows, maybe he got some calls from United Artists. He demanded Criterion recall every Laserdisc and presumably burned every disc he could find. Well, he didn't burn all of them. You can find Terence Young's audio commentary by doing a little Google search and watching it on YouTube, and it's fascinating and disturbing, and you will be shocked with how candid Terence Young was. It is an absolute must-listen. And today, From Russia with Love is still regarded as one of the best James Bond films. Numerous actors, including Lois Maxwell, who played Moneypenny, including the producers, they cite this film as their favorite James Bond movie, and Sean Connery cites this as one of his favorite James Bond films. This film is so good that it was turned into a video game in 2005 by Electronic Arts and is the only successful pre-Pierce Brosnan video game starring James Bond, and it is the only James Bond video game that was not a movie tie-in. Not only did reclusive Sean Connery support the game by allowing his likeness and voice from the 1963 film to be used, he was so impressed with the game and of this new emerging creative medium that he actually recorded new voiceover for the video game.
A dry martini. Shaken, not stirred.
And that is so cool and unheard of. And that's how much he loved From Russia with Love. And so with the mega success of this movie, you know there's going to be a third film. And From Russia with Love was going to be a tough act to follow and pretty hard to beat, but the next film is going to do just that. Join me next time as we talk about one of the best James Bond movies of all time, Goldfinger.